What is up, everybody? This is Josh back with another video, and it is finally time for us to prepare for the next upcoming format, which is not only including Darkwing Blast but also Magnificent Mavens, which at the time of recording this video is going to be released in pretty much exactly 1 week and will be legal for YCS Pasadena and YCS Dortmund. And I'm sure you've all heard a lot about mainly the Ishizu Cards, Ishizu archetype coming out in that set and how it's going to shake up the metagame, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So let me switch over to Dueling book right here. I'm gonna give you guys an explanation of how specifically the Ishizu cards are gonna change the format, because they are extremely powerful and are gonna definitely change the way the game is being played for probably a long time. If we're looking at the OCG, they've been shaping up the meta there for multiple months now. We're expecting the same in the TCG. Everything else in Magnificent Mavens, there's not that many new cards and mostly not that relevant. Like, there's some Sky Striker support that's not really even worth mentioning. It's like decent but not enough to make the deck powerful, just in case you wonder what I thought about that. I just wanted to use this video as an introduction into the Ishizu archetype, and then show you the two most common pairings for it, which are going to be Ishizu Tearlaments, and I think Ishizu Naturia had been popping up in the OCG, but it's really mostly Tearlaments. The reason why they're called Ishizu, by the way, none of them have Ishizu in their name or their text or whatever, is because they are all new versions of those old monsters, the Earth Fairy type monsters used by Ishizu, the Kelbeck, the Mudora, the Agido, and the Keldo, I believe was their names, which is also the names of the new cards. They're just new versions of them, but incredibly broken. So the first one we're looking at is going to be Agido the Ancient Sentry, which basically there's 4 different ones and they come in pairs. 2 of them do a similar thing and the other 2 also do a similar thing. Agido and Kelbeck are the first pairing because the second portion of their effects is pretty much the same. So Agido reads, if a card is sent from the hand and or deck to your opponent's graveyard, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then you can special summon 1 level 4 Earth Fairy monster from your graveyard, except Agido the Ancient Sentry. Neat first effect, not the main reason why this card is good though. If this card is sent from the hand or deck to the graveyard, you can send the top 5 cards of each player's deck to the graveyard. Then, if Exchange of the Spirit is in your graveyard, you can send the top 5 cards of either player's deck to the graveyard. You can only use each effect of Agido the Ancient Sentry once per turn. If this card is discarded, sent to the graveyard from the hand, or milled from the deck to the graveyard, you can make both players mill 5 cards, which we all know how powerful milling 5 cards can be, especially in a deck like Tearlaments that has a lot of graveyard-centric effects, as well as just all of these Ishizu cards have graveyard effects. So milling 5 cards is very, very powerful. This one is the weakest one out of the entire archetype, funnily enough, even though that's already a pretty good card, I would say, but just milling 5 for both players, I think that's the main issue that a lot of people have with these cards, is that they have so much randomness attached to them, especially because you mill from both players' decks, which can be quite risky if both players are playing a graveyard centric strategy. But yeah, that's the first counterstone of the archetype, is these 2. Kelbeck as well has the secondary effect of, if this card is sent from hand or deck to the graveyard, you can send the top 5 of each player's deck to the graveyard. If Exchange of the Spirits in your grave, you can set 1 trap from your grave. That's a slightly different second effect on the mill part, but most importantly, both of these, when they get milled or discarded or whatever, both players mill 5 cards from their deck. The first part on Kelbeck though is actually quite interesting, because Kelbeck reads, if a card is sent from the hand and or deck to your opponent's graveyard, so same condition as on Agido, instead what he does is you can target an opponent's special summoned monster, special summon this card from your hand, then return the targeted monster to the hand. Now that means Kelbeck is just a good card in general. That's just a very good card. It's a good hand trap, right? If the opponent sends a card from their deck or hand to the graveyard, you can just summon it and bounce a monster. It's just like a hand trap compulse that summons itself as a level 4 monster. It's a very strong card, even without like considering the second part of the effect. That would already be a hand trap you would probably play sometimes, but no, just for some reason it's a stellar hand trap and interaction on your opponent's turn, plus being a mill 5 when it's sent to your graveyard from hand or deck. So like, honestly, Kelbeck is an insane card. So that's the 2 that mill. Agido and Kelbeck are the ones that facilitate a lot of milling, and of course if you play both of them, you have a very high chance of, like, if you hit mill 5 with Agido, you have a decent chance of hitting Kelbeck, or the other way around. So very often they just end up being mill 10, which is very, very interesting. And then we have Keldo the Possessed Statue and Mudora, which both have similar effects in some ways, but basically Keldo is, you can discard 1 other Earth Fairy monster, special summon this card from your hand, then add 1 Exchange of the Spirit or 1 card that mentions it from your deck to your hand. So the first part on Keldo is just like very synergistic with the other 2, of course, because if you discard them for Keldo, you get to mill 5 cards. Also, you get to add another one of those, because they all mention exchange of the spirit in some way, shape, or form. So you can search any of the other ones you want and get to mill 5, and you have a level 4 extender. Very strong. It's not over yet though. Quick effect, you can banish this card from your field or grave, then target up to 5 cards in any graveyard, shuffle them into the deck. If exchange of the spirit is not on your field or in your graveyard at activation, you can only target up to 3. Quite the restriction. You can only use each effect of Keldo the Possessed statue once per turn. Now, before we talk about how broken this one is, let's talk about Mudora, because Mudora is almost the same thing. The second part of the effect for Mudora is exactly the same. Also has the effect on field or grave. You can banish this card and then target up to 5, shuffle them, but if you have exchange, you can only target up to 3. But also, you can discard one other Earth Fairy monster, special summon this card from your hand. The second part of this effect is different though. Then you can place a Gravekeeper's Trap from your deck face up in your spell and trap zone. So both of these are basically level 4 special summons by discarding one of your other Earth Fairies, which you're going to play a lot of, right? They both get a bonus when summoned. Keldo adds another monster or exchange of the spirit, and Mudora activates Gravekeeper's Trap, which we'll look at in a second. And then the second part on both of these is the same, where they are insane graveyard disruption. We all know how good DD Crow is right now, and these are a triple DD Crow, basically. Even if you don't have exchange of the spirit, it's a triple DD Crow from the graveyard as a quick effect. Can even be used from the field, and this is really, really insane, because for the most part, this also counters a lot of strategies in the game, like Runic, Sprite Elf, Tearlaments, whatever you want to call it. This prevents all of it. Of course, it doesn't banish the stuff, it puts it back to the deck, which not a huge difference, honestly. If anything, it makes the deck better, because you get to recycle a lot of your stuff, because you can target your own cards as well, so you'll never like deck out. You would think that a deck that mills so aggressively would deck out, but no, these cards are just so good and so efficient at recycling your stuff from the graveyard. You can very often play one-ofs that normally you would be playing two. Like one example is Tearlament Saliak, right? Is a card that most Tearlament decks currently run multiples, because they want to make sure if they mill it that they can still add one from their deck to their hand. With these cards, you don't have to worry about it. You can just put it back into the deck and then search it. That's incredibly powerful, and just the fact that it's inherent, like quick effect graveyard disruption that you have available at all times is insane. But let's just, before we talk about how good this stuff is, read the last new card that's relevant for this, which is Gravekeeper's Trap, a continuous trap card that reads, while exchange of the spirit is in your graveyard, your opponent cannot activate card effects in the grave or special summon monsters from the graveyard. So if you manage to set this up onto your board with Mudora and you mill exchange of the spirit somehow, you have a permanent Abyss Dweller, which is very toxic in any graveyard mirror matches. We all know how oppressive Dweller can be, and this deck can basically search Dweller. And then the second part of Gravekeeper's Trap is you can only use each of the following effects of Gravekeeper's Trap once per turn. During the main phase, you can discard a card, add a Gravekeeper's monster or an Earth Fairy monster from your deck to your hand. This is pretty nice. It's just a searcher, right? It's just discard a card, search, triggers all of your graveyard effects. If you have them in hand, you can discard them. If you want a Kelbeck during your opponent's turn to interrupt their plays, you can get it with Gravekeeper's Trap. If you want to get any of them into the graveyard on your opponent's turn to mill 5 cards or disrupt their graveyard, you can do that. This whole deck is about also playing on your opponent's turn, because a couple of them are hand traps, and you know, Havness, mill one of these, mill 5 more. It's our turn, it's not your opponent's turn anymore. The last part of this effect is not super relevant, but kind of a nice bonus. During your opponent's draw phase, before they draw, if this card's already face up on the field, declare a card name, look at the card your opponent draws for their normal draw, and if it's the declared card, send it to the graveyard. Of course, you're not going to hit very often, because the chance is just not that high, but you can just call a card like, you know, Dark Ruler No More. If that's the card that beats your board, you can call a card like, I don't know, Super Polymerization, you can call a card like whatever, and just get rid of it for a small chance. And even if you don't hit, at least you know what they drew. You gain some free information from the card. Obviously not the main reason to play the card, but it is a nice bonus that's added on top of the card. And then of course, Exchange of the Spirit is a card that I'm going to say right now, you don't have to play these. The monsters are good enough on their own. There are versions of the deck that try to play the Gravekeeper's Trap, that try to play the Exchange of the Spirit. Some versions play only the Gravekeeper's Trap just to get it with Mudora for the discard and search effect. And some play both, because I mean, if you set up Gravekeeper's Trap and you mill Exchange of the Spirit, you lock your opponent out of the graveyard, which is powerful. But Exchange of the Spirit, you're never really going to activate it. I think if both players have 15 or more cards in the grave, pay 1,000, each player swaps the cards in the grave with the cards in their deck, then shuffles their deck. I've never seen this being activated, really. It's only like in the deck sometimes, so you can like mill it and then lock your opponent out of the grave in the mirror match, but it's kind of a high risk, high reward kind of thing. So in case it's not obvious yet, I just want to talk about like, why are these cards so broken? Why are these cards so strong? It's just a mix of both of these cards milling so much. It's not even inconsistent consistent anymore, whether you're gonna get to all of your Tearlaments or whatever. Like, you're milling so much that you're just gonna get there. They are so efficient at doing that, because like none of them really minus or anything. It's like the Keldo is just like discard a card, special summon itself, it replaces the card that you discarded by adding another monster, then whatever you discarded probably mills 5 cards. It's probably like a +2 or 3 on average if you resolve the mill 5 in the right deck. And then the fact that these two, even if your opponent mills a couple of graveyard effects or is playing a graveyard centric deck, you're going to prevent all their graveyard interactions anyways. Like, you're going to be able to like shuffle 3 back with this, shuffle 3 back with this, both once per turn. If you mill multiple, like, your opponent's basically not going to get to use the graveyard at all for the rest of the game. They are all level 4, so very often these decks will set up Dweller before they mill your cards, so whatever you mill cannot trigger, but whatever they mill will trigger. And then just like the Gravekeeper's Trap and the Exchange of the Spirit just add that little bit of more variance to it. Like, if they get lucky, open Mudora, pitch Kelbeck, activate Gravekeeper's Trap from the deck, trigger Kelbeck to mill 5, including an Exchange of the Spirit, you're locked out the graveyard for the rest of the game. Pretty much, it's completely disgusting. Helps facilitating every single graveyard strategy in the game, which that's what I want to get to next, is what do you do with these cards. I'm going to show you my first version of Ishizu Tearlaments, which is the most obvious, you know, choice, obvious pairing with these. A lot of people ask me, you know, can we play Infernoids with this? Can we play Paleos with this? Can we play whatever deck that needs the graveyard with this? The answer to that is yes, you can. Of course, every deck that needs the graveyard gets better with these cards. The question is, does it get better than Tearlaments? Probably not. Tearlaments was the best graveyard-centric strategy before these cards release, and it's getting the same amount of improvements by adding these cards than your deck does, like Infernoids or whatever. They're not going to get better than Tearlaments all of a sudden, I believe. Now, this is very much not something I've tested forever. This is my first version that we built together on stream. It's mostly based on the OCG list, but for the most part, there's not that much to do, really. I think you just play all 12 of the Ishizu cards. You play Herald of Orange Light, which Herald of Orange Light is so painful in this deck. It's so painful to play against Herald of the Orange Light, because think of the pairings for Herald of the Orange Light. If you discard Herald and Agido or Kelbeck, you're negating a monster effect, destroying the monster, and then you mill 5. So you essentially stop your opponent's play on their turn, and then you start playing on your opponent's turn, because you're gonna mill something. Look at this deck. This deck's always gonna mill something. And then that's crazy. And or if you discard Keldo or Mudora, you're gonna negate the monster effect, destroy it, and basically have a triple DD Crow available on their opponent's turn as well. So Herald turns into some insane disruption in this archetype. Really comes down to like a lot of variance with Herald of the Orange Light, because you only have like 12 pairings with it, right? And like other heralds, I guess. But like if your opponent draws a live Herald of the Orange Light, it's gonna be very hard for you to play. Whereas if they, you know, Herald of the Orange Light, if they draw it dead, it doesn't do anything. It's a high variance card, but it's very, very strong. And then you play the max amount of Tearlaments. You play the Pearl of Rhino, the Terraforming, the Instant Fusion, Saliak. I decided to include the Gravekeeper's Trap and the Exchange of the Spirit in this version. You don't have to. I just wanted to try and see how it feels. So far, it feels like it's good, but not 100% necessary. Simply because it feels a little win more. You know, there are breaks, and like for the most part, I feel like the deck is strong enough without them. So essentially, if you play the 12 Ishizu monsters, the 12 Tearlament monsters, 3 Heralds, that's already 27 cards. Then you play Pearl of Rhino, Terraforming, Instant Fusion, Saliak, that's like you are 33 cards. You have like 7 flex spots if you want to keep it 40 cards. I decided to fill these with some Bestials for the mirror matches, some Talents, because I mean, Herald of the Orange Light, Havness, Kelbeck, these cards play on your opponent's turn. Talents is quite good in the mirror match, I think, and I decided to try these two. That's how I made the deck 40 cards. There's not that much you can do in terms of deck building, which is why I'm not a huge fan of the concept. In general, I like to be able to do a lot with tech cards and non-engine in deck building. This deck doesn't really have that much innovation in it, but that doesn't mean it's a bad deck. It's still going to be very, very strong. So the idea behind it is to simply, you have the Tearlament package, and the Ishizu cards are by far the best way to facilitate milling. They also are all level 4s, so they really facilitate Abyss Dweller, which is like in the mirror match, the biggest pain, right? Is like whoever sets up Dweller first can just go aggressively mill as much as they want from both players' decks. It doesn't matter, your opponent can't trigger their stuff anyways. It's disgusting, the race to Dweller, pretty much. I think the most broken thing about this entire deck is that it's pretty much packed with engine, right? You have like 12 Tearlaments, 12 Ishizus, 4 field spells, Instant Fusion. It's not that much tech non-engine stuff going on, but you still have an insane amount of hand traps, right? This is still 3 Kelbeck, 3 Orange Light, 3 Havness. It's already 9 hand traps without doing anything. So if you add like some Bisteds to it, we're already on 12 hand traps in a 40 card deck without doing anything really. Without committing much to anything here. We have like a crazy amount of hand traps. We have a crazy amount of interaction with our opponent going second. I think this deck is insane. Very, very strong. I think the biggest downside to this deck is honestly so far my first impression. The mirror match is painful. The clear effect of Albion. They always have Kelbeck, dude. I'm sick. The mirror match seems not that good, which is always a kind of a, you know, a downside for me when like the best deck in the format, presumably maybe a tier 0 deck, has a weak mirror match. I don't like that. I want to be able to win my mirror matches based on like building the better deck or being the better player. This deck doesn't have all that much skill expression simply because it's like when you go first, it's a lot down to, do I have a hand trap that stops you? Because otherwise this deck pretty much makes Dweller all the time. And then sometimes you have hands that have to rely on, like sometimes I have to mill 5 with Kelbeck or Agido from my opponent's deck as well, and I really have to hope they don't hit any broken stuff because I wasn't able to make Dweller before. No, I have to do it. We have to gamble. It's gambling. We are gambling. This hand doesn't have a way around it. And we place the Gravekeeper's trap into the spell trap zone. And then we mill 5. Let's go. Rage! There's some problematic stuff, in my opinion, in these mirror matches. Herald of the Orange Light, crazy variants. Havness, crazy variants. Kelbeck and Agido milling 5 from both players' decks. Can be very, very annoying to deal with, at least in my first mirror match. And it also just like the first turn being like, I activate a Sharon, pitch a Kelbeck, because that's the only play I have, and then both players mill 5, and then like off of that first action, we play for like 10 or 15 minutes on my first turn. They already have like 2 fusions on the board, and now I have to break their board without a battle phase on my first turn, and then they still get a full turn after. Bro, all I did was special summon Mudora. It's my turn. It's my turn. Oh. It can be very confusing. I think it's not completely terrible, to be fair. It's a complex mirror match because a lot of stuff is happening. The problem is about some of the stuff that's happening, you just don't have control. That's why I'm currently trying to find alternatives to this, which I think that's, I guess, the good news at the end of all of this. From my first couple of days testing this stuff on stream, I do think there are a couple of decks that can beat this deck. Like, for example, Pure Sprite, I've been having an okay time against it. It's not like a hard counter to it, but it's playable. This video is getting rather long. I don't want to ramble too long about this. Just wanted to make you guys familiar with the concept of these 4 cards, right? How Agido and Kelbeck mill so much and have decent hand effects, and Keldo and Mudora are kind of the enablers that special summon themselves and then have like this DD Crow-esque effect in the graveyard, and tell you guys about them, how they work, why they're so powerful, give you guys a first list to start testing with, which, speaking of, I can also show you the Naturia deck that has been somewhat successful in the OCG. Been trying it a little bit, doesn't feel that much better in the mirror match than just playing tier Ishizu yourself, but it's definitely a solid deck with the new Naturia support from Darkwing Blast and some of the older ones that negate spell and traps and attacks. It's an interesting concept, but for the most part, I think on my next couple of videos, I might want to make a video of which rogue decks are still viable or which other decks in general are still viable and which decks have ways of beating the Ishizu cards and how to counter them in general. Let me know if that's something you would like to see. Let me know if that was helpful to you right now, this video. Are you looking forward to this Ishizu metagame? Because I'm hearing mixed opinions, right? Some people say it's going to be very painful. Some people think it's harder than it looks at first and might actually end up being a solid format. I haven't made my mind up on it yet. I'm a little afraid of bringing such a high variance, you know, milling so much and stuff like that. Deck to a YCS, I might end up having to, you know, if I don't find a good way to beat it, I might have to join it. We'll see about that. That's something we're going to find out on my streams. So, you know, Twitch link is down below as always. If you want to see me play these decks, play against these decks, test the next format live, I'll be live like 4 days a week, 5 days a week, depending on how much time I have. And yeah, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye. If you mill another Merly, I'm calling the police. If you mill a Merly now, I'm calling the police. I'm getting my phone. I'm getting my phone. If you mill another Merly, I'm calling the police.